Hi, I'm Anthony Guardia, and welcome to WCAT, our continuing interviews with candidates. This year, our school committee and town council do not have any challengers, so we're interviewing them, asking them the questions that hopefully you want to hear. But as always, I want to start by thanking our friends at WCAT, and specifically their executive director, Ian McDermott. A lot of people don't know, Ian is actually the one who organizes this. He's the one who coordinates the schedules. He's the one who calls me, calls the candidates. So if you're watching, thank you to WCAT and Ian. I'm lucky enough to work in a lot of communities. None of them do as much work as Ian and his team at WCAT do. With that said, let's get started with our first school committee candidate, Kevin Fontanella. So now I'm going to start with a really difficult question.
All right, hit me.
All right, Kevin. Can you introduce yourself to that camera and tell people why you're running?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Kevin Fontanella. I'm running for school committee. I'm currently on school committee, so this would be my second term. And it's, I think the school district, has gone through a lot in the last 3 years. Obviously, we've got the new high school being built. We've got a ton of new curriculum that have been established. And, my wife kind of asked me the same question that Anthony just asked me about, why you're doing this. And although I do have a lot of time commitments with my, activity in Saugus, I'm the union president there and also a teacher. I figured that, I kind of, there's enough aspects of school committee that I'm still really interested in pursuing. One interesting thing about school committee is that there's different subcommittees, and luckily I've been able to go pretty much be on all of them because you're able to switch every year. And the thing I really like about being on school committee is the instructional aspect. Like I really get excited when they're presenting curriculum, and I'm able to ask about academic outcomes, different what's going on instructionally in the district. That's the stuff that I'm really, kind of focused on. I think all of us have, different things that we're really interested in, and really, all of us have our special focus.
Which is arguably, the most important part is the academic outcomes. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, I'll tell you, I said this even with the town council. There's nothing scientific about the questions. It's not like we do a survey or a poll or whatnot. Yeah. I usually just ask friends, families, and a network of people who I know are involved. Yeah. They're in the community groups. They read the item. Yeah. What they do. I will say it was a lot easier for the town council. They were like the same issues that came up.
Yeah.
School committee, and I think it's because of, where you are in your life, the issues were everywhere. So I tried to grab what I thought were the ones that came up the most.
Okay.
And this is in no specific order of importance, but we'll just start because I just read an article about it. And one issue that came up that people were worried about is the Department of Education potentially being shut down by the Trump administration.
Yeah.
With that said, if you've been following the local papers as well, you've heard Doug Lyons talk about teacher trainings. You've heard Superintendent Lyons talk about the number of multilingual learners we have.
Yeah.
All these things are backed by federal grants. Being a school committee member, I guess, what is your concern of what could happen if those federal monies do get shut off?
Yeah.
And what do you think we should do in Wakefield to either prepare or not prepare for it?
Yeah. So one thing that's really interesting with the Department of Education is a lot of people don't know what the Department of Education is. So when we think about the Department of Ed, we think about federal funds, Title I funds that are going for low-income students, grants for special education students, and also teacher education and training, right? So there's kind of those buckets that we think about the Department of Ed that is like providing federal funds to states. One thing I tell people when they ask me the question is, there's a law in place that has nothing to do with the Department of Education. I think it was passed in '65, and it's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act or something like that. And that's the law that actually started, this funding. The idea that, we should have the federal government coming in and providing money for these specific students and these specific programs. So if the Department of Ed does get abolished, right, if that's eliminated, the law is still on the books. And obviously you have all this crazy stuff coming from Washington. You have executive orders coming out of anywhere. So I can't tell the future, and I can't say that this law is going to get overruled. But I imagine that even if the department was, blown up, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, I'm assuming that those grants coming from the federal government would still be going to the states. I think the rules might change with the grants. I think that they might try to, play with the formula, and with the amount of funding. You definitely hear from the Republican Party about, vouchers and block grants. The idea that let's just throw the money to the states and take away the requirements. Let the states take the money and do whatever they want. So because we're in Massachusetts, truly, there's some things that can be scary. I'm actually not that worried. I kind of think that if we got these block grants, I kind of think Massachusetts would pretty much be doing the same thing with that federal money that we are now. So obviously the big concern is if those grants get cut. Like if they actually say, no, the money's gone. Like we're not gonna, like the Department of Agriculture, they just took away funding for food. That's definitely gonna affect us in Wakefield. That will affect everyone in the state in terms of nutritious lunches. Like that's something that really did happen. Yeah, so I'm actually hopeful that will not happen. But obviously, if the actual dollar value of those grants goes down, it definitely is a concern. And obviously, we can talk to our state reps, we can talk to all we want, but in the end, that's a federal thing. Like that's
Well, and it segues into the next question because this one, I'll say there are two questions that come up that are basically what I'll say. Bigger is not the right word, but more national, encompassing of all the schools, because it did start getting specific when I started asking for basically depending on what district they lived in. But what that rolled into was naturally budgeting. So if you see now, I think North Andover is cutting 40 teachers. Stoneham has a $14 million override. I think Tuesday, Linfield. Yeah. I think it's $5 million. Melrose just said no to an override. I think Reading and North Reading either had an override or about to have an override. So my point is all our neighbors, Melrose just had an override, all our neighbors are having overrides, except for us. I guess our question, and most of the overrides are school related.
Yes. Yes.
What do you say to parents and seniors and taxpayers and everybody in between who A, might be worried about tax increases, or might be saying, hey, do we need to be spending more money? Are we not spending enough on education? And I guess what is your fiscal philosophy when it comes to budgeting in the Wakefield school system?
You just went. Okay, yeah, I'll give you that.
So yeah, my
fiscal philosophy is like, and this is just my personal philosophy. I think public education is one of the best innovations that makes this country great. And I'm not talking about Massachusetts. I'm talking federally. I think that if you look at why America is the number one economy in the world, it's because we have a history, like a long-standing American tradition of governments investing in public education, both on a public college education level and on a local K through 12 level. And I think that there is, like, if you look at all the scientific advancements, all the technology that's, like, let's be real. If we're talking about all the advancements that have been taking place in the last 150 years, it's coming from USA. It's not coming from China. Right now there's a competition going on, but in the end, it's education that has caused us to be great. So for anyone that wants to cut public education, I mean, I don't think it's just for the kids or going to all these soft arguments about, we have to do it for the kids. Like this is for national security. This is what makes America great. Like we need to give opportunities to everyone. My second thing about public education is we talked about the Title I grants. Yep. It is really important that we educate every single student. Right? You go to other countries, they are it drives me nuts when they're comparing, when they rank America to every single country, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, America's 29th in math. Oh my gosh, all these countries are killing us. And I always say, are they educating every student? Are they counting every student in those scores? The bottom line is, in this country, we educate everyone. Everyone gets an education. So if we're 29th in math, you know what? If you're going to, Germany or going to these countries, and if they're really educating everyone and those are going in the scores, fine. But from what I see, like I think we're one of the only countries that truly does educate everyone, and like everyone's taking the MCAS, everyone's taking these tests, right? It's not like we're taking this population, being like, okay, you go take those tests and you go take those tests. So I think that we actually do have great outcomes, better than sometimes the news media really will tell you. So my fiscal philosophy is that it's a dumb investment to not invest in public education. And I'm not saying this as a like, oh, let's do this because I want this is a smart investment economically, right? I think it is very important to invest in schools. Now, in terms of what's happening locally with overrides, what's happened is that you've got factors that have happened since COVID. Number one, you had ESSER grants that were given to every town in the state of Massachusetts. That's often referred to as COVID money. A lot of towns use those COVID grants to pay salaries. And what's happening is that money is gone. That money is over. That federal funding is gone. And what happened with a lot of districts is they were using that money. I'm not saying it was bad that they were using that money, but they were using that money to pay for adjustment counselors, to hire new teachers, to meet the needs of the students coming back from COVID. And the problem is that if those districts didn't budget well, if they weren't looking long-term in the future, that's one reason why you're starting to see these hits. So when you see all these teacher cuts, a lot of these teachers that are being cut, a lot of those positions were positions that were fulfilled by that COVID grant that now is gone. The other reason is inflation, as we all know. Like, look at the price of the high school. Like, the high school price went up like 70 million, whatever it was, like from the time the original bid. I mean, so that's taxes. Like, so inflation definitely is a big hit. Health insurance costs, I think this year, from what I saw, the GIC is the health consortium that Wakefield is part of. I'm pretty sure I saw the number was 14%. Wow. That's a 1-year increase this year. So you've got that districts are on the hook for to pay for a percentage of health insurance costs. So how did Wakefield do it?
So what happened in your tenure that made it?
Oh, it's not me. It's
I'm trying to help you out. You don't have anybody you're running against.
I was a finance subcommittee last year, but I'm not this year, so I can't take credit for it this year. I'm just kidding. I can't take credit for it at all. So what Wakefield has done is we basically have invested that money, the COVID money, we invested in curricular programs that once you buy, it's kind of there. Like the teachers have them, right? And what we're hoping right now, if you look at our budget this year, it's a level funded budget. We're not hiring really anybody. Like there's no new ads. Like we're pretty much just covering the contractual increase for the teacher's contract that was just signed. We have stuff in the budget for the contracts that we're working on right now. But there's nothing added. And like looking at long-term trends, I don't know if we are going to be adding next year or the year after, right? Like, you could foresee level funding for the next 2 years. For those that don't know level funding, that just means that we're not adding any positions. We're basically just keeping the exact amount of teachers, exact amount of everything right now, adding no new programs. So I think that we did a pretty good job of long-term forecasting. I also think municipal leadership has been pretty good. If you look at our fiscal reserves, like we have a pretty high free cash percentage compared to a lot of districts. So we have a very good credit rating, which helps on interest payments, for the new school. But I think that we've budgeted pretty conservatively over the last 2 years. And these districts there's districts that had deficits last year, like $3.5 million structural deficits. So when people are laying off 27 teachers now, like in North Andover, like people are like, I have a friend there, and people are like, where's the money? Well, if you do the math, they had a deficit last year. So what they're doing this year for laying off is covering the deficit from last year and a 1 point whatever they got this year. So a lot of this stuff is like paying now for the sins that happened like last year or 2 years ago. So I guess the short answer, not that I'm giving a short answer, is that I think we didn't step over bounds 2 years ago, where I think like when people came out of COVID, other districts might have been throwing money left and right. I think we were like, okay, let's slow down, be measured, and make sure we're not going to be in a fiscal hole. And when you brought up all those towns, it's not just those towns. Like this is hitting
there's more.
Everyone. I mean, Saugus, weirdly enough, and Wakefield, I think might be the two fiscally healthy towns in this area. Because Saugus also is not going for an override. We're actually trying to add 4 new teachers because we're, in relative fiscal health. So it's, I think it's just, looking long term and just, hopefully we'll be able to keep doing that. The other thing is, I know you've probably talked about this, but special education costs.
No, absolutely.
And that's been in school committee meetings, like out of district costs have gone up huge too, and that affects everybody.
No, absolutely. Well, actually, and that does, speaking of school committee meetings, we'll go to an issue that you guys just talked about. But I will say it's the one issue that I got the most consistent answer, and I don't mind sharing this feedback with you. Consistent answer was later start times for high school.
Yeah.
Everybody was. So what are your thoughts on start time? What do you think they should be? Should they be changed at all? And if they should be changed, when?
Yeah. So my personal opinion on this, I'll give you my personal opinion, like what I think. I mean, I'm a teacher. I've taught students for 26 years. So I started at 7:25 in the morning when I started teaching. And I had kids period 1, and it was a fixed schedule through period 7. And I had different, I would teach some advanced placement classes period 1 some years. I'd have like college prep classes, honors classes. The bottom line is kids are tired in the morning. I mean, it is, and like parents know it, like teachers know it, anecdotally, there's things happening in that early stage where, you can't say the same education's happening like from that 7:25 to 8 o'clock as it's happening from 10 o'clock to 10:30. It's just, it is different. So looking at all the research, looking at all the other districts that have moved forward to a later start time, I am for it. Now, the caveat of that is, and I actually have a really good friend that lives in Norwood. They just did this switch, and she was mad. Like, she was mad with the switch because it affected childcare in her house. Like, it really did. It had a definite impact on her personal family because the high school kid was going to watch the elementary school kid, and then that would throw out the window. So there's always going to be adjustments. And what we talk about school committee is we have to, if we go through with this, like I do think we should go through with it, and we should go with later start times. But I think we really have to be looking at like trying to foresee all those issues and really try to be proactive about the communication of it. That it's like, yeah, we know this is going to be a challenge. I think Kevin Piscatalo brought up traffic like the Woodville, right? If the Woodville and the high school get dismissed at the same time, we all know what's going to happen, right? There's in the end, like with those with the growing pains and the pains of change versus the positivity of high school kids and middle school kids going to school later, I think the benefits of going to school later outweigh the negatives of the change.
Sure. Now, the next question, and I will tell you, I'm most curious about your answer on only because of your position as a teacher and president of the teachers union, is about contract negotiations. Specifically, and this is probably because I asked some paraprofessionals about the paraprofessional contract, which seems to be the one that came up more than the others. But I guess very similar to the fiscal policy question, but what is, as a school committee member, kind of your overall philosophy on negotiating with our unions? And then specifically, do you have some thoughts on the contracts we're negotiating now that you can share for people who don't know? Some of that stuff is, it's by law, you can't share too much. But, anything you can share, any thoughts you'd like to share, please feel free.
Yeah, so I've negotiated about 3 labor contracts in Saugus on the teacher's end. And right now I'm on the labor relations subcommittee, so I'm...
What a unique perspective, by the way. I'm very...
Yeah, so I'm negotiating with the Unit C, the paraprofessionals right now. The thing about the paraprofessional contract, which is interesting, is teachers don't really have an hourly rate. Mm-hmm. Like, we pretty much think about our salary, like what we get paid, for the year, and then stipends and all this other financial stuff. Where with paraprofessionals, there's actually an hourly rate that's kind of attached. Then of course you multiply that by the amount of hours, by the amount of days, and you get a fixed number that they're going to be making. So it's so it's kind of interesting looking negotiating through that, because then when you're talking about extending the school day, for example, so let's say if paraprofessionals were going to work an extra 10 minutes, like I'm just throwing it out there, that rate would automatically go up. Not the rate. If the rate stayed the same, there would be more money at the other end. So from a mathematical perspective, with teachers' contracts, it's very easy. It's very, well, if we get a 4% raise, everyone's going to make this much, right? Or if we add a step vertically or horizontally, you're going to get an extra 3% on either end. So it's kind of a simplistic, like it's a much more simple framework, where the para contract, like you're thinking about, like adjusting the raise for the hourly rate, but then you're also looking at time. So it's almost like there's another dimension there, which is new to me because I've never negotiated that type of contract. So sitting on, this end of the table. So that's like kind of an added wrinkle, like when thinking through this and when we have discussions. Yeah. In terms of what I feel about, both paraprofessionals, that I work with in Saugus, but, also here, is that, I mean, there are paraprofessionals like that, like, there are ones that I've worked with that when they are in your room and they are assisting, like, I've worked with rock stars, and when you look at like what they're doing in the classroom, like when you hear the argument that, the education could not take place, without the para, I can guarantee that, yes, this definitely happens. Like magic can definitely happen in the classroom. If you have a great pairing between a teacher and a para, like where the two of them are in the same room and they're on the same page, and I know in Wakefield, I'm pretty, just by looking, it seems like you've got some of these partnerships that have been there for a while. It's not just one
my
year.
My son has one of those partnerships.
Mine did too, right? With the same
teacher. Were you? Yeah. All right.
So like when you see that, it's gold. Sure. And so it's almost hard to quantify, like in terms of like a dollar figure, what that's worth in terms of the educational outcomes you get. So I definitely get, I definitely understand that from that perspective. So yeah, again, you're looking at, budget realities, and then you're looking at, trying to get, you to see, as much compensation as we can get that. If you
No, understood. So I want to ask you about our capital projects. Obviously, the high school's going well. It seems like it's going well.
Yeah, faster than I would have thought.
Yeah, Galvin's new. Woodville, Dolby, 1999, but still relatively, right? Yeah. Walton just had renovations. I did, again, now this could just be because of the demographic that I'm in. A lot of my friends are in elementary schools. But I do hear from Greenwood parents, this kind of, why is my school still look like my school when everybody else's, how is that equitable? So as a school committee member, I guess, how would you respond to families who live in Greenwood who feel maybe the Greenwood school, not educationally, I think they all love their teachers, they all love their parents, they all their stuff, but the facility itself still has not maybe received the attention the other ones have?
Yeah, it's, the thing about the Greenwood is that when you look at these old buildings, and I taught at the Saugus High School, which was built in like 1947 or something, like, so a similar, very old building. One thing that, Doug, and I talked about was one thing was heat. Like in May and June, September, when you have like a 95 degree day in that building, it's like, that's where, like as a parent, I'm feeling uncomfortable, where, if my kid is like physically uncomfortable because, there's no air conditioning in that building, that's something that, obviously all of us can empathize with, where, a kid is at the Dolbear or a kid is at the, the middle school, it's a different situation. And so I definitely understand, like Greenwood parents are like, hey, we need some improvements. We need some capital improvements here. So, obviously that new high school is going up now. I can say that, we have had discussions like very, about the Greenwood, and that's obviously, the next building that's going to need, improvements. Whether now the game would be, are we talking renovation or are we talking new building? Which is always like the conversations we had. In Saugus, we actually did not knock down the Belmonte, which is the middle school. We did a complete renovation. In the end, we decided not to go with a big rebuild. Obviously, we built a new middle high school,
Yep.
and then the Belmonte now serves as upper elementary. So, so you can be creative. But yeah, I definitely think that just based on temperature, with our Septembers are getting hotter. It's just really hard to have kids sitting in there when it's August 30th or whenever, and it's
Understood. No, understood. I will then. I'll give you our last. I guess we'll say specific question, and it actually has to do with the Doyle and the early elementary again. And I'm very open to the fact that this could be biased because of my. I talk to a lot of parents who have kids around the same age that I do. So, is the wait list for the Doyle is growing and growing, and I actually think Doug mentioned to me once, and I hope I'm the right number, that it was like now 60 families plus.
Mm-hmm.
What do you tell families who are looking to get into early ed? I mean, I guess I'll start. I think I already know your answer. I mean, but do you think there's value in offering early ed? Yeah, I'd say I don't think I need to ask. But just for humor me. And then the second part is, what do you say to those families who are like, we really want to get in? Is there a plan in Wakefield, or would you advocate for a plan in Wakefield to try to expand that type of enrollment?
So the Woodville definitely, had I think it was a class for preschool that was offered. And so, the Doyle, when we look at the population of Wakefield, right, and you look at, we're building a brand new high school. What happens when you build a brand new high school? Like generally, you think you're going to see a population bump, right? You think you're going to attract a few more families into Wakefield. You think you're going to have, hopefully it won't be a sudden bump, but you're going to see a gradual increase. So we have to be thinking about our spaces in our schools. And so, when we ask about how full is the Dolbear, how full is the Walton, generally when we look at class numbers, one thing that's interesting is like parents might assume that every year would be the same. That it's like, so let's say your kid was in first grade and like, oh my gosh, the classroom has like 26 kids. Like, why is it so big? Or 25, whatever the number is. I mean, there's some grades, like even, I went through the numbers once. Some grades have more kids. It's like a random, like, it just happens, right? But I think we are going to have to assume that we are going to have larger class sizes with the new high school. You would think there'd be a little bump in families over the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's going to be, like a lot of people I think like are around town are like, oh my gosh, it's going to happen next year. Like they're all going to come, like everyone's going to be coming in.
Once, yeah.
I don't think it's an all at once thing. I really think, like looking at Saugus, I think it's we have more kids. Like we have more people in our school system now than 5 years ago, than before COVID. Definitely, like you can prove it with numbers. I think it's a gradual increase, but it's still going. The slope is going up. Like it's not like the growth curve has stopped. So I think that we are going to, in the next 1 to 2 years, have to be actively thinking about, like where we can, have a space where we could have more pre-K spots. Because pre-K is important. Like both my kids went to pre-K, for multiple years. Like, it was definitely a massive, massive thing. So yeah, it's really important, to start, the reading early and all that.
No, all right, well, we'll move on to what I call our non-issue per se questions.
Yeah.
These are just questions that I like to ask anybody who's always running for office. The first is, can you give me an example of when you changed your mind?
Changed my mind. Oh, wow, that's a good one. I'm pretty stubborn. I really hate changing. I really do hate changing my mind. Let me think. Okay, yeah. Oh, I'm trying to think about something I can legally talk about. Just because it was a decision so one thing about school committee is you see our public sessions, right?
Yeah.
So you see what we say publicly in open meeting. We have executive sessions where sometimes we have to talk about issues that aren't talked about in open meeting. And And one thing I like to do is I'll often give my teacher perspective. Like when, administration will say something, I'll be like, yeah, but this is what I think like teachers really think about this.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I think one way in my mind has changed. I did think of something, is that Wakefield has definitely put a lot of funding in new curriculum, right? And I'm kind of an old school teacher. I always the way I explain it is kind of like a football reference, right? If you talk about like Bill Belichick with the Patriots of old, right? So you have instruction, and then you have curriculum, and you have assessment, right? Those are your three things in teaching, right? So what's the assessment? That's the game. Like who's going to win, who's going to lose. Like that's your test, right? Curriculum, in football terms, that's the game plan. Like that's like this is what we're doing. Like this is the game plan for this game. That's kind of like all the stuff we've invested in for math and ELA and science. We're trying to develop these curriculum that are kind of a path that will help teachers get kids to these outcomes. I've always been really biased that those two things don't matter. Like those two things, whatever. Give me whatever curriculum you want. Give me whatever test you want. It's all about instruction. Like in the end, it's all about what happens in the classroom. And so in football terms, that's like what's actually happening in practice. Like what is the coach doing with the kids, like or NFL adults, that's going to get them prepped to meet that assessment. And that's really what teaching is. And I've always been, it's 100% that, the other stuff doesn't matter. Looking at some curriculum things that have happened in Saugus, especially around math, I'm not on the ground here. I'm not on the ground. I'm just listening to what people tell me at school committee meetings. I can say I have seen an improvement in Saugus because of a new math curriculum. So when the superintendent or the assistant superintendent say, no, this is worth it. Like we should switch from A to B and B to C. Because I'll often be the person, I'll be like, what's the proof? Give me the proof that this is working. Like I want to have the proof now. And I think that I'm a little more willing to wait on it based on what I've seen, where in the past I'd be like, let's really listen to the, we don't have to worry about curriculum. Let's just focus on just purely instruction. And I don't know if that.
No, I think that's a great example. Actually, I think that's. I would say that's one of the best examples we've had.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Then the other, just I guess, general question I always like to ask is, so is there an issue that you think is not really being talked about, in the community groups, in the public, that you'll have to confront in your next term?
An issue that I think might be around.
Yeah, so for example, I'll give you Doug Butler, I thought nailed it last year. He said Steve Mayo retiring. He said nobody's talking about it. It's going to happen within the next year or two.
Yeah.
So is there an issue you think that maybe we aren't talking about that we should be focusing on?
It's a good question. I think that it's always good. So again, we're all captives to our own experience. So in Saugus, our ML population has definitely increased. And I don't think we put the resources in place to help teachers help instruct that population. I think we're doing good now. I think we're getting better, but I think we're like 2 years, 3 years a little late. So I think in Wakefield, I think it's really important to kind of try to forecast trends. So if we do have an increased high needs population, if we do have an increased ML or population, high poverty, whatever, I think we have to be looking at, okay, what kind of programs are we going to have in place for this? And I think that our leadership is definitely thinking about that. That's something that, as a teacher, when you're teaching an ML student who's like really trying to not just like be learning English, but also trying to master the content. It's honestly like really impressive because I think about I studied in Russia when I was in college. I couldn't imagine like being a 10-year-old in Russia or Spain or wherever, and actually having to learn math or history. So I really do feel for the kids because I'm with them every day, and I kind of, so when I think here, I'm like, I just want to make sure that if that growth curve is going in a certain direction, I think we have to have like plans put in place there. In terms of another issue, I mean, we've already talked about I think there are going to be fiscal issues. I mean, health insurance. I mean, if you look at some of the costs that are going on, like health insurance costs are not sustainable. I mean, it's at some point, some of these things are going to break, and that's going to have impact for budgeting.
Yeah.
So one thing I always tell my friends is, I think that whenever people look at public education, how it's funded, we're stuck in the same paradigm. It's like, okay, we increase property taxes, we do this, we do that, we do overrides. I think we have to really start looking creatively at financial solutions to some of these things, because if we really think that public education is valued, then I look at these other districts and you're cutting this. It's like I think that we have to look at, and this isn't just a Wakefield thing. This is like a state law thing, right?
No,
we have to look at solutions for that.
No,
That'd be my two.
No, though, Kevin, I think some good answers, and then I always ask what I'll call like my fun questions. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Wow. Well, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I was a big fantasy guy. I was a big sci-fi.
I'm very excited about what the answer could be.
Big sci-fi. Well, it's not. So my wife reads like a lot of fantasy science fiction, and now I read like all boring nonfiction stuff, like history stuff and all that. But I actually loved the David Eddings like series when I was a kid growing up. The Bulgarian War, and those were good as a kid. In terms of recently, like a book that really, like I thought was really good. It was a book written about Oklahoma City, and it traced the history from the beginning through now, and it used the NBA, like seriously, like the Oklahoma City Thunder, as this weird connection. And it was just this brilliant book. Unfortunately, Oklahoma's in the title, but that was the last really good piece of nonfiction I read. But yeah, when I was a kid growing up, I think I reread those books like millions of times. And I read Tolkien and all those, but yeah.
No, those legend stuff.
Yeah.
All right, favorite book, favorite movie?
Wow, I'm a big movie guy. You ever listen to the podcast Rewatchables?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's like, so my friend just got me into it, and I'm so crazy that I literally will go through the beginning and I'll actually like watch the movie, most of which I've seen, but like from the 80s and 90s, and then listen to the podcast. So when I'm going to say when I was growing up, Princess Bride was a big one. Mm-hmm. I mean, man, there's so many, but I'm going to tell you, a movie that had a really big effect on me when I watched it was Good Will Hunting. I really do. I know it's kind of lame for your favorite movie, but man, I can't. Yeah, no, there's scenes in that movie that I'm just like, wow, this is like. I'd go that one. Yeah.
Favorite song?
Favorite song. So I'll say Thunder Road from Springsteen.
And favorite band, and then we got one last one.
Favorite band, I'll say Springsteen.
Or musician. Springsteen. Great choice.
Yeah.
And then finally, last but not least, favorite TV show.
Like ever?
I guess ever, yeah.
Ever. I would probably say The Wire.
Oh, I
would probably say The Wire.
All right. Well, now I have the final question. Most difficult one. Can you do me a favor? Look into that camera one more time and just tell people why they should vote for you. You only need one vote, Kevin.
Yeah, you're right.
So
right.
What do you have to do to get that one vote? And thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kevin, running for school committee, and I think you should vote for me because as a teacher, as an educator, I think that it is really important to get teachers on school committees. I hate to say it, like we're the only people in the trenches, And you kind of want that perspective when you're talking about a lot of these bigger issues. So yeah, that's it.
Yep. All right, well, Kevin, thank you so much. You did great.
Thank you.
Thank you to WCAT. Good luck, and keep up the great work.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.